The Divine Origin of the Bible, Part 4 by B.B. Warfield. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Fourth, special characteristics of the Bible. Another and an even more cogent argument might be presented from a consideration of some special characteristics, either of the whole Bible or of some of its parts, an argument hitherto untouched. This argument would soon, however, grow much too vast to be included in this essay. We must content ourselves with only pointing at a distance to only one particular which might, were there space, be urged most convincingly. 17. We refer to the progressive character of the teaching included in this book with the special cases which might be adduced under that head. It begins with first principles expressed in outward symbol, and advances gradually to the full system, working out its approaches in history before delivering it in dogma. We do not urge simply that this progressive scheme is consistent with a divine origin for it. We urge that this supremely wise method of delivering truth and training a people, taken in connection with the unity of the system throughout the whole, is consistent with nothing else. No doctrinaire made this Bible. See what kind of work they do in the history of Middle-Age Florence and Revolutionary France, but a most consummate statesman who knew what was in man and how to mold him to his purposes. We would appeal in this connection, progressiveness, especially to the practical and practicable character of Old Testament legislation, and thus we are led to assert that those very passages concerning polygamy and kindred themes, which have been made an occasion of jibe against the Scriptures, are themselves a most cogent argument for their divine origin. We Americans ought to know by this time that the best way to secure polygamy unharmed and enshrine it unconquerably under the protection of a nation is to write on the statute books inoperative laws against it. The Bible was framed by too wise a statesman to fall into that error, and we who enjoy Christian homes today have to thank God for it. The unspeakable wisdom of dealing at that age and under those circumstances with polygamy, divorce, slavery by regulative laws, which in regulating discouraged and in discouraging destroyed them, makes strongly for a superhuman origin of the legislation. So again, growing out of this same progressive system, we could appeal most strongly to the ritualistic system of symbolical worship given to the Jews and by law secured from failure, by which object lessons, all schoolmasters to lead to something better and higher, were ineffaceably taught to a whole nation, which was thus prepared to receive the spiritual lesson meant for it. Still again, we should appeal to the wise method of New Testament legislation through great principles rather than specific ordinances, thus securing absolute universality in connection with perfect definiteness. Or again to the remarkable tenderness and beauty of this legislation, especially apparent in the cases of slaves, wives, and children, and temporal rulers, a phenomenon in the age when it was given enough of itself to suggest a divine origin for the one book which contains it. Or still again to the wise silence of the same legislation on many subjects on which it must have been very tempting then to legislate, but legislation on which we can see now would have imperiled the success of the main purpose for which the book was given, and obtained no corresponding gain. On all these and like points, however, it is not now possible to touch. We pass on therefore to our last remark. Fifth, impossibility of accounting for the Bible. 18. That the Bible, thus standing in the world, being of such sort and having had such a history, has yet to be accounted for on the hypothesis that it had only a human origin. Here it stands, just such a fact in the universe, a substantive thing, tangible, and that can be examined. The ingenuity of men has been feverishly busy with it these hundreds of years, yet the world still awaits a theory which will render an adequate account of it on any other hypothesis than that it came from God. Theories have been attempted, but one after another they have broken down of their own weight, or have had justice executed upon them by fellow unbelieving hands amid the plaudits of all men of all parties. Thus it happens that, up to today, no hypothesis except that of superhuman interference has been able to stand a half-century as an account of the origin of this book. What is this but the confession that without the assumption of superhuman interference this book cannot be accounted for? That these miraculous claims and these miraculous assertions cannot be rationally or satisfactorily explained away? Look for one moment at the efforts made to account on natural grounds for the miraculous element in the New Testament. First, a school arose which tried to work on the assumption that whenever a miracle is recorded, the event described did really happen, indeed, but that it has been exaggeratedly and mistakenly described as miraculous, and not merely natural, by the New Testament writers. The sick were healed, but by medicinal means. The dead were raised, but only from seeming, not real death. That attempt to explain away the miraculous failed, as requiring as great a series of miracles of wonderful coincidences as it explained away. Another then arose which wished to account for it all as a series of myths, holding that there was a kernel of truth in each event described, but that this kernel had gathered much falsehood around it, as it rolled through time from mouth to mouth before it got recorded in our Bible, just as a snowball grows almost unrecognizably greater as it rolls down a long slope. But this attempt was wrecked hopelessly on the lack of a soil for the myths to grow in, that is, of snow to frame the balls of, and of time for them to increase in, that is, of any hill for them to roll down. Then another rose on its ruins, an elaborate theory of party strifes and forgeries and reforgeries of books in every conceivable interest, so that the same material was worked over and over again by false and designing men to serve each new notion until the final outcome was our New Testament. Again, this theory was wrecked on the lack of time for all this elaborate process before the date at which adequate proof is in hand for the existence of the books. The whole elaborate scheme falls with the failure of the attempted rape of the 2nd century. It cannot be true unless all history is false. Time is lacking for the New Testament to have grown in, if considered as a product of time. Whence then came it? Soil is lacking for it to have developed in, if considered as a human development. Then whence came it? All schemes which have hitherto been invented to account for its origin without God have pitiably failed, and there is no particular reason to look for anything more cogent to be advanced in the future. If, however, this book cannot be accounted for apart from God, we seem shut up to account for it as from Him. Certainly, the only rational course is to accept it as from Him until it is able to be rationally accounted for without His interference. With this we may fitly close our inquiry. The query with which we started seems abundantly answered. A supernatural origin for the Bible appears cumulatively proven. In closing, it would be well for us to take note of 1 or 2 facts in regard to the argument which has been offered. Let it be observed then, 1, that no attempt has been made to distinguish between a superhuman and a divine origin for the Bible. This is not because the two are not separable, but only because they are, in our present argument, practically the same. 2, that no attempt has been made to distinguish between divine origin of the system and that of the books recording that system. This again is not because the two are not separable, but only because, so far as the argument has been pressed, though not much farther, the two need not be practically separated. 3, that no question has been raised as to the extent of the divine in the Bible. This is due to 3 facts, because this question need not be raised primarily for the establishment of the faith, but is necessarily a consequent one to be raised after the general divine origin of the book is admitted. Because again, the humble Christian often looks upon and draws life from the Bible without raising this question, simply accepting what he reads as divinely given to strengthen his faith. And because again, it was impossible in one essay to treat both questions. 4, that nevertheless the facts and arguments which have been adduced in a general way to prove the general divine origin of the Bible not only prepare the way, but even narrowly questioned will raise a strong presumption for the further conclusions that this book has been not only in a general way given by God, but also specifically inspired in the giving, that thus its every word is from Him, and that it is worthy of our reverent and loving credence in its every particular. End of The Divine Origin of the Bible, Part 4 by B.B. Warfield.